Welcome back to the Deep Dives, everyone. You know those incredible kingdoms and empires we explored in the north?
Oh, yeah.
Well, this time we're going to turn our compass south and take a deep dive into those unique contributions of the southern kingdoms
Mhm.
between, what was it, 300 and 1500 CE?
Absolutely. It's a period just full of innovation. Everything from political structures to cultural achievements really lays the foundation for what we see in India's medieval period.
Exactly. And, names like Cholas, Pallavas, Vijayanagara, they may not be as familiar as their northern counterparts, but trust me, they have equally captivating stories.
Oh, for sure.
So our mission today, really, to distill the essence of those innovations, see how they all fit into the big picture of ancient India.
Right.
So are you ready to unpack all of that?
Absolutely. Let's start by shattering this misconception that the South was, always in the shadow of the North. These kingdoms weren't just holding their own. I mean, they were flourishing. A concise history of modern India really drives that point home.
Absolutely. It emphasizes how these kingdoms weren't just reacting to the north,
Mm,
they were forging their own paths.
right.
And when we talk about forging paths, I think we got to start with the Cholas,
Oh, for sure.
with their incredible maritime empire.
Yeah.
But what made their naval power so sophisticated?
It wasn't just about having a large fleet. You see, the Chola naval power was built on these advanced shipbuilding techniques, and also a very deep understanding of monsoon winds, ocean currents, and really a strategic brilliance that allowed them to control vast stretches of the Indian Ocean. We're talking trade routes spanning from the Arabian Peninsula to Southeast Asia.
So it was really this combination of technological prowess, strategic thinking, that really set them apart. I mean, it wasn't just brute force. It was this really sophisticated system that allowed them to project their power and influence
Right.
across the seas.
Exactly.
So while the Cholas were making waves, so to speak,
Yeah.
the Pallavas on land were pioneering something equally impressive, a remarkably decentralized system of governance.
Uh-huh.
So they weren't just about centralized power like some of the larger empires we've discussed.
Oh, no.
So this sounds intriguing. Can you give us like a concrete example of how their system actually worked in practice?
Absolutely. Imagine these village assemblies, right, where local matters were discussed and debated, and they had these elected councils that managed resources and even resolved disputes.
Huh?
It was a system that gave a voice to the people at the grassroots level, something really quite unique for its time.
So in a way, they were ahead of the curve in terms of promoting local autonomy and, citizen participation.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, though, did this emphasis on decentralized power contribute to their stability and prosperity? Or did it, maybe create some challenges in maintaining unity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really speaks to the complexities of any political system. I mean, there are always trade-offs, right?
Hmm.
While decentralization may have fostered local engagement and innovation, it could have also led to fragmentation and challenges in coordinating a unified response, let's say, during a crisis.
Definitely adds another layer to the story.
Right.
And it really just highlights the diversity of political structures that existed in ancient India.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't talk about these kingdoms without diving into their cultural achievements. Because, let's face it, this is where things get truly captivating.
Absolutely. This period, it was really marked by this flourishing of art, architecture, literature, and philosophical thought. And you see this beautiful tapestry of cultural expression woven across all the southern kingdoms.
Yes, and the excerpt from the literature of the Madhyamaka School of Philosophy in India was, I gotta say, a real eye-opener for me.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, who knew that such intense philosophical debates were, like, raging during this time,
Mm.
especially within the Madhyamaka School of Buddhist thought?
Right. The Madhyamaka school, it was groundbreaking. It really challenged these conventional notions of reality with its, emphasis on the concept of emptiness or sunyata. But it wasn't just about abstract philosophical ideas, though. It actually had this ripple effect that influenced everything. I mean, from art and literature to social practices.
So we're talking about a school of thought that wasn't just confined to these ivory towers.
Right.
It was really shaping the very fabric of society.
Yeah.
And speaking of shaping, the architecture from this period is simply breathtaking. Architecture of Mughal India paints this very vivid picture of these magnificent temple complexes built by the Cholas.
Oh, yeah.
Like the Brihadisvar Temple at Thanjavur. It's like a masterpiece of Dravidian architecture.
Absolutely. And then you have the Hoysalas, masters of these intricate sculptures and really ornate temple architecture. They created a really distinct style. And of course, we can't forget the grandeur of the Vijayanagara Empire, with its architectural projects that blended all these diverse influences, almost like a physical manifestation of their vast cultural reach.
It's really incredible to see how each kingdom, even within the South, developed its own unique, I guess you could say, artistic fingerprint.
Right.
But it makes me wonder, though, was this explosion of creativity fueled by the political fragmentation of the era?
Interesting question.
With all these different centers of power, did each kingdom feel this need to kind of assert its own cultural identity?
Yeah.
And that led to this incredible outpouring of, art and ideas.
It's an astute observation. It's fascinating to think about how political structures and cultural output, can be so deeply intertwined.
Right.
While we can't say for certain that the fragmentation, directly caused this creative flourishing, it certainly seems likely that it played at least some role.
Yeah. It's almost like having these distinct centers of power created this fertile ground for artistic competition and, of course, innovation. Now, shifting gears a little bit to another crucial aspect of these southern kingdoms,
Okay.
their social traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Our sources indicate that while caste continued to be this major force in shaping social hierarchies, things weren't really static.
Right. A History of India highlights the emergence of these new social groups and even regional variations in caste practices during this time.
Okay.
It's a sign that the social fabric of ancient India was anything but monolithic. It was constantly evolving and adapting.
And that evolution wasn't just happening in the abstract. The history of vegetarianism and cow veneration in India and the penguin history of early India offer some fascinating insights into those shifts.
Yeah.
They both point to the rise of powerful merchant guilds, indicating this growing economic influence that was, outside the traditional caste structures.
Precisely. And it wasn't just about economics. We also see the increasing influence of these devotional cults, particularly in the South. And they attracted followers from all walks of life, really blurring those caste lines. And then there's the spread of vegetarianism and, of course, ahimsa.
Right.
That principle of nonviolence, particularly through the influence of Jainism.
So even though the caste system remained, this very powerful force, there were these, countercurrents pushing for greater social fluidity.
Right.
And really challenging these established norms. It's almost like we're seeing the seeds of social change being sown, during this period.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, though, how did these social trends ultimately impact the social fabric of medieval India?
That's a question that we'll definitely delve into as we move forward. But remember, history is a continuous narrative.
Yeah.
And these developments in the South, they weren't isolated incidents. They were really shaping the future, laying the groundwork for the social, political, and cultural landscape of medieval India.
And that brings us to the end of part one of our deep dive. We've seen how these southern kingdoms weren't just surviving but thriving, developing unique political systems, fostering cultural achievements, and experiencing dynamic social changes. And in the next part, we'll really explore how those developments actually set the stage for the medieval period, examining the ripple effects of these southern innovations.
Sounds good. It's easy to kind of fall into this trap of thinking about history as just a series of neat little boxes, right?
Yeah.
Ancient, medieval, modern, all nicely separated.
Yeah.
But what we're really seeing here, though, is these southern kingdoms during this period, they weren't just a prelude to the medieval era, they were actively shaping it.
Yeah, it's like they were laying the foundation, brick by brick, for what was to come. And the history and culture of the Indian people, it uses this really great metaphor to describe this period. They call it a crucible for the medieval era.
Oh, I love that analogy. A crucible, like a place where different elements are kind of melted down, combined, transformed.
Right.
And that's exactly what we see happening here. The innovations, the cultural achievements, the social shifts, they're all being kind of forged in this crucible. And it's shaping everything, the political, religious, and even, artistic landscape of medieval India.
So let's break down some of these connections. We've talked about the innovative administrative systems of the South, particularly the Pallavas decentralized approach.
Right.
Did those ideas actually have any influence on the way later kingdoms were structured? both in the north and the south.
Absolutely. The Vijayanagara Empire, for instance, which emerged centuries later, seemed to have taken some inspiration from the South's administrative innovations. They blended military might with this cultural patronage. It's a model that later Deccan sultanates would adapt and, of course, refine.
So it's almost like the Vijayanagara Empire served as this like bridge between these earlier southern innovations and the later political structures of the Deccan.
Yeah, yeah.
That's fascinating. And what about culturally? We've talked about those vibrant philosophical debates and artistic expressions. Did any of that leave a lasting impact on medieval India?
Oh, without a doubt. Think about the devotional cults, for example, that flourished in the South.
Mm.
Those dedicated to Vishnu and Shiva, for example.
Mm.
They spread their influence really far and wide, deeply impacting religious practices across the entire subcontinent. The Bhakti movement, for example, with its emphasis on personal devotion and an emotional connection to the divine.
Right.
That actually originated in the South, and it eventually became a driving force in shaping the religious landscape of medieval India.
It's incredible how these ideas and practices transcended those geographical boundaries
Mhm.
and really left such a profound mark on the way people experienced faith. It really highlights like the power of cultural exchange
Yeah.
and, of course, the interconnectedness of these different regions.
Precisely. And, the artistic legacy of the South really can't be overstated. Those magnificent temples, the intricate sculptures, the rich literary traditions, they all contributed to this vast cultural tapestry that continued to influence artistic developments across India well into the medieval period and beyond.
It's like dropping a pebble in a pond. Those ripples just keep spreading outward.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're seeing these political, religious, artistic connections. But what about the social changes that we've discussed?
Right.
The rise of the merchant guilds, the spread of vegetarianism and ahimsa. How did those trends actually influence the social fabric of medieval India?
Well, those trends represented a push against, those rigid hierarchies of the caste system.
Okay.
While caste, of course, remained a very significant factor in social organization, that growing economic power of the merchant guilds provided, alternative avenues for social mobility and status. And then the inclusive nature of the devotional cults embracing people from all walks of life,
Right.
that further challenged those traditional boundaries.
So even though that caste system persisted, there were these cracks, emerging, these signs of change,
Yeah.
this yearning for like greater social fluidity.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you realize that social transformation is very rarely like a sudden upheaval.
Yeah.
It's often very slow, steady evolution.
Yeah.
With these early shifts really laying the groundwork for more profound changes down the line.
Exactly. And don't forget the impact of vegetarianism and ahimsa,
Oh, yeah?
promoted by Jainism and embraced by other groups. These practices gradually influenced those social norms and ethical values.
Hmm.
And it really impacted everything from dietary choices to attitudes towards non-human life.
Right.
It's a testament to how, seemingly small shifts in thinking and behavior can have this ripple effect, across an entire society.
Absolutely. It's all interconnected, isn't it?
Yeah.
The political innovations, the cultural expressions, the social changes, they all weave together to create this intricate tapestry that is the history of ancient India. And it's clear that the southern kingdoms weren't just passive participants.
No.
They were actively shaping that history, influencing the trajectory of the subcontinent as it moved into the medieval era.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a reminder that when we study history, we can't just focus on those dominant narratives.
Right.
We need to explore the margins. We need to uncover those often overlooked stories that can, completely change our understanding of the past.
And speaking of uncovering stories, in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to step back and consider some of the what ifs of history.
Okay.
What might have happened if the southern kingdoms had played an even more dominant role on the political stage?
Interesting.
It's a thought-provoking question that I can't wait to explore. Okay, so we've made it to the final part of our deep dive into those incredible southern kingdoms. We've really gone on this journey together, right?
Yeah.
Through the political landscapes, those artistic heights and those social transformations.
Right.
But I want to take a step back for a second and ask, you, our listener, to imagine with me for a moment a different path, a what if of history.
Oh, I love those. What kind of path are we talking about here?
What if the South had exerted an even greater influence on India's political landscape? What if a Southern power like the Cholas, for instance,
Yeah.
with their naval mastery, or the Vijayanagara Empire with their kind of unique blend of military and cultural power.
Right.
What if they had actually taken a more, I guess, dominant role,
Hmm.
as India transitioned into that medieval era?
Yeah.
How do you think history might have unfolded differently?
It's a fascinating thought experiment. I mean, if we think about the Cholas for a second,
Yeah.
their control of the Indian Ocean could have translated into like a much more assertive political presence on the subcontinent. Imagine their naval power sort of like projected inland, influencing trade routes, alliances, and even, the trajectory of those northern
It's
empires.
almost like a ripple effect.
Right, right.
A shift in that balance of power could have had some serious
Yeah,
consequences.
yeah.
What about the Vijayanaga Empire? I mean, we know that they were known for their cultural sophistication and, of course, their ability to kind of hold their own against those Deccan
Yeah.
sultanates. But could they have become like this unifying force across a much, much larger part of India?
Well, the Vijayanagara Empire's model of blending, that military strength with that cultural patronage was really unique. They really fostered like a vibrant intellectual and artistic scene, but at the same time, they had this formidable army. Had they been able to consolidate their power further, who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe they would have created a more unified South and, potentially even extended their influence northward.
So we're talking about, the potential for different alliances,
Mm.
different cultural exchanges.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe even a different map of India. It really makes you think about how, history isn't this inevitable, linear progression.
No,
And it's
no.
really full of all these different possibilities,
Mm.
all these choices made, and of course, paths not taken.
Absolutely. And that's what makes, studying history so fascinating. You can trace all the events that did occur, but you can also really kind of explore these, what if scenarios, these
Right.
alternative realities. They allow us to really appreciate those complexities of, historical causation.
It makes you realize that, these seemingly small events
Yeah.
or decisions can really have this ripple effect, shaping the course of, well, empires, really,
Mm.
and of course the lives of millions. So as we wrap up this deep dive into those amazing southern kingdoms, I really hope you come away, our listeners, with a sense of awe at their contributions and really a deeper understanding of their lasting impact on India.
Yeah, I mean, we've really only scratched the surface here. There's just so much more to uncover, to explore, to debate.
And that's the beauty of it, right? So keep diving deeper, keep questioning, and keep discovering that rich tapestry of India's past. Thanks for joining us.